Thank you. Hi, everybody. Great to see you. So you'll see in the chat, I just sent some instructions and a link, that bit.ly/BC2M poll. If you are able to, if you could put that into another device besides the one that you're on this call with, so if you have a phone nearby or another computer or tablet, go ahead and put it in there. If not, no worries. You'll just have to flip back and forth between the Zoom screen, where I'm going to share my screen here in a second so you can see the results, and that other link where you can enter in your answers. So can I get a thumbs up once you have that poll ready? Okay, awesome. So I'll go ahead and share my screen, and you'll see the first question there is asking you where you're from, so you can get a little indication of where everyone's calling in from. So I see a lot of California, NorCal, and SoCal. See some Bakersfield, that's exciting. Arizona area, Georgia, Indiana, New York, New Jersey. I always get nervous during this. I'm gonna not know a state. So this is really great to see us all across the country here on this call. Thanks for doing that. And I'm gonna go ahead and go to the next question. This question is just a little mental health check. And how you feeling today? Which emoji would you select to really indicate how you're feeling? So we see a lot of sleepies and a lot of happy. I'm not even sure what B really shows, but I think we're all a little like frazzled, maybe that's the word, frazzled when it comes to the uncertainty in all of our lives right now. So that's definitely understandable, but I'm really happy to see a lot of you are doing well today. So that's really lovely. Okay, next one is, what are you most excited to experience once it's reopened or restarted where you live, whether it be live sports, concerts, music festivals, shopping, not for groceries, because I know that's the one thing we're able to do. Eating in restaurants is really big. Museums, libraries, movie theaters. Eating in restaurants, I completely agree. Music festivals, I know I had so many things canceled in the last few months, so I find it to be helpful personally to really feel hopeful and look forward to these different things and just returning to these probably somewhat different experiences in the future. So awesome. Okay, next one is we're just kind of curious to see the distribution of what your favorite subjects are in school. So really curious to see. So history, wow, super interesting. I have to say that was not my forte in high school, so good for you guys. It's so important. Science, obviously psychology, we kind of had to put that one in there, of course. But we do have some math representation, that's good. And yeah, art and PE, English. PE is probably always my favorite, so great. And then kind of going into what Meredith will be speaking to a little bit later is, what's something in your life that you feel like you overthink a lot? Future. That's a really big one, especially when it comes to just where you all are in your lives right now. BC2M, don't worry, you always have your regional staff available to help you guys out if there's everything you're ever uncertain about things. Relationships, oh man, that's big, especially in your age groups, and that doesn't necessarily go away when you're older. So, but wonderful, we see college, school, work is huge. Friends, it's interesting as you kind of continue to figure out how to work through these different types of relationships in your lives. Definitely can be a big thing. Decisions, people, plans, work, it's a big one. Definitely. This is great. And so later on in the call, once Meredith starts to speak to different ways that we can kind of work to self-soothe these anxieties that are totally natural and that we all are able to really figure out ways and coping strategies to deal with these things that we all overthink sometimes in our life. So thanks everybody for participating in that. I'm kind of switching over to the other aspect of Meredith is favorite way to use Pinterest, because I know I've kind of faltered and done different ways of using Pinterest in the past. One thing I wanted to add on here was having a wedding planning board. I feel like that's a classic. But DIY crafts, we definitely use Pinterest a lot for inspiration for some of our Bring Change to Mind activities and events that are on our portal. Motivational quotes, that's a big one. I also use it for fashion ideas. I do say I use Pinterest every year specifically for Halloween costumes because I am not creative when it comes to that. Study tips, travel inspo. I think that's good right now too, to just other things we can look forward to seeing in the future once life gets a little back to normal. But wonderful. Thanks everybody for participating in our poll for this week. And I will turn it back over to Emily now.
Super. Thanks, Brenna. Well, that was really fun to do together. So, well, let's go ahead and get into our conversation with our special guest, Meredith Arthur. Now, as Meredith and I start our conversation, you guys know the drill. This is not a lot of your first times with our call. Feel free to start entering some questions in the chat as we're having a short little conversation. Anything that kind of comes up that you'd like Meredith to address with you, we'll try to get to as many as we can. We can't guarantee we can get to every question, but we'll do our very best. So let me share a little bit about Meredith with you and we'll get started. So she's currently a content lead at Pinterest, and she's worked at a couple different tech companies, and she's what we call an early pioneer of getting people to talk about mental health in a normal way. So she created the website Beautiful Voyager in 2015 for overthinkers, perfectionists, and people pleasers. Whew. I get that. So she edits Invisible Illness. It's the largest mental health publication on Medium, and she's the author of her recently published book, Get Out of My Head, Inspiration for Overthinkers in an Anxious World, which is the subject matter for tonight's call. So Meredith, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I'm already loving this so much. That like real-time poll was very cool. What a great idea.
Well, it's such a great way to foster community and see, you know, maybe a lot of people are feeling some of the same things right now.
Yeah, I loved seeing the overthinking ideas pop up and see them, some of them grow and others get smaller. Super interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's talk about that a little bit more. So, you know, our thoughts and emotions are kind of being pulled in a lot of different directions right now. And a lot of it can be based on what we're seeing on social media, the news, or the people we surround ourselves with. And that can, you know, cause overthinking and leading to anxiety. So how are you dealing with everything right now as far as anxiety and overthinking goes?
I feel like I have been in a pretty good space in some ways. And at the same time, my body is telling me that something's not right. I am getting more migraines than usual. And one of the things I say a lot about overthinking is it's such a subjective term, but physical symptoms are not subjective. You know if you are having dizziness or fainting or nausea or headaches or tingling in your hands and legs. Those are signs that you might be overthinking, actually. And that was something I had to learn. So though I seem to be doing well, the migraines are telling me, you know, it is taking a toll for sure.
Yeah, and that's so interesting how that physically manifests in your body. And it's interesting you said that I have a 12-year-old son who's been getting migraines during
Exactly. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. It's terrible.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what are some tips or tools that are helping you right now to overcome overthinking and anxiety right now?
So one of the most important things is, and I talk about this in the book a little bit, but the idea of accepting the wave. So the wave is the wave of hormones that floods our system when we're feeling anxiety or stress. And for some of us, that hormone wave is a little higher than others for many variety of reasons. Could be situational, could be genetic, is probably a mix of both. And so just knowing that the wave is hitting, just knowing what's happening in the world around us and that some of the situations that we're facing are very unusual. And so the feelings I'm having and the hormones that my body is trying to deal with is nothing surprising. That actually helps me a lot to normalize some of the feelings I'm having.
Mm.
And then I have some things I've done to just try to help myself. One is I've gotten into certain routines I never would have otherwise, like taking really long walks and appreciating the pace of life for what it is. So for example, I've been reading books that I've been meaning to read for many years, but just never had. And I know that's really hard. I'm not saying everyone can get into reading, because I've certainly heard some people have a hard time with it, but I've managed to slow down to the point where I'm able to do that.
Yeah.
And the other thing I always say is, like, the three things that are the most important for me with anxiety are medication, meditation, and communication. So all three of those are part of my daily life.
Let's say that again. So medication, meditation, and communication.
Yep. So
Okay,
talking to you all right now is communication for me. And it makes me feel good to think that I'm connecting with other people on this topic. It's like a gift to me to feel like I'm helping others. And it helps me express my ideas, and writing does this as well. Writing is that kind of communication as well.
Well, let's talk
but yeah.
Go ahead.
No.
Okay. Well, let's talk about writing a little bit more and about your book and how that has manifested over time and the community you've kind of built around destigmatizing mental health.
So I started my site, which is actually a community for overthinkers, in 2015. And the reason I started it was because I had been at a lot of different startups right in a row. In fact, I had been at 3 different startups thinking they were my full-time job in 1 year. It was a crazy year, 2015. It was super intense. And as it was happening, and either I was let go or the company went under, I mean, a variety of things happened each time, which is what happens in Silicon Valley when you're dealing with startups. And I was getting sicker and sicker. My migraines were getting worse. I fainted on a bus, and I had no idea what was wrong. I didn't know I had anxiety. I just didn't know. I went to see a neurologist here who luckily was super experienced, older, had seen many, many patients over the years, and she was able to diagnose on my 3rd visit that I had generalized anxiety disorder. And it was completely eye-opening to me. I had no idea that was what was happening with me. And I always say, like, if you already know that you have anxiety, you're a big step in front of where I was at that time. I just didn't know. And when afterwards, I realized that a lot of the language that I saw out in the world did not reflect my experience. So for example, things would say, you worry a lot. And I was not a worrier. I was a problem solver. So everything that I did was to figure things out. I would work so hard to figure everything out. And it turns out that for some people, that means worry. I didn't think of it that way. So as I started to explore this, I realized I was not alone. There are a lot of people who think the way I do. And in fact, my neurologist told me that she would have the same conversation with 3 to 4 people a day in Silicon Valley, most of whom would not listen to her. She said it was really unusual that I listened, and then I said, like, I'm curious and interested. So I started to be really interested in what this disconnect was between what the words that had been used in the past and my experience of life. Words like worry and anxiety did not relate to me. But words like people-pleasing, perfectionism, overthinking, those were all things that I understood. Those were things that I could relate to. So that's why I started the community, was because I thought, I want to find these other people. Who are they? And what have they learned about this? I just hadn't seen anything like that out there. So one of the things on the site is a map, a lighthouse map, where people can go put pins from all over the world. And in fact, when you go in, you see every different continent has a pin, if not many, of people who are representing themselves as overthinkers. Just to remind us, like, this is sort of a universal human experience. This is in every different background, socioeconomic background, race, like where you live, culture, community, like this overthinking trait sort of transcends all of those borders.
Yeah. So you started this community and then eventually turned into a book. That's so exciting.
Yes, you're right. Sorry, that's the second part of your question. So all these people started joining the community and they started sharing their experiences. And I learned from them, and I really was trying to gather a lot of the wisdom I was seeing there. And eventually that turned into, this is the book, by the way. And I wanted to show you because, is your website like a blog? Oh, good. Oh, I see. Should I answer these? I love that there are questions popping up. So the thing I wanted to show you about the book is that it's very visual. So it's got original art that was hand created for the book on every single page. I worked with an amazing artist who is the former director of the Color Factory. Thank you, Dior. I love it too. I'm like obsessed with it. I mean, it's just like the feeling of it is incredible. And even like the paper quality. And then in the back, there is a mini book that is about when something is wrong, but nothing is wrong. And this book is supposed to be about feeling. So this is like thinking. This is like how to help yourself with thinking. And this is like the thing you put in your back pocket when you're on the go. That's really more about feeling. It's much more sort of how free-floating anxiety works and what to take with you. So design is super, super important to me. Design is something that I feel like has been missing in mental health. And so when I started Beautiful Voyager, I was very interested in design. Like, how do I make something feel the way I want people to feel on these topics, which is curious, excited, interested.
That's amazing.
It's
little book to put in your pocket.
This little guy.
That's really,
we call this like a little medicine on the go. Just like bring it with you and you have it with you. I found that many people are reading it first. They say, when I get the book, I pull that little thing out first.
I really would too.
Yes, I love, by the way, thank you for asking where can we find this book. That is so nice. The book is available at like all your different choices of where you buy books. There is in particular this independent bookstore website called bookshop.org, where you can go, and if you have a favorite local bookstore, you can like sign in and it helps fund that local store. But it also is at Amazon and all other places. So it's in lots of different places. Okay, so I see a couple of questions I just wanted to quickly answer. Is your website like a blog? Great question, I love that. The website is personal essays by people talking about their experiences, as well as a list of experiments that are things like, try listening to bird music and it explains why bird music is something soothing, or try taking off a layer of clothing. It's weird, but it helps, like changing your temperature. And so it's just like a lot of experiments that you can try. And then there's also an area that's got guides that are more in-depth and researched by writers that I paid to do that research. So there's different areas of the site, but most importantly, there's also a community element on this direct message platform called Slack. Anyone can join. There are people all around the world. And so it's like a chat system where you can go in and talk to anyone or just share something or learn.
That's amazing. You know, going back to design and what you've done with your book, as I mentioned earlier, you're a content lead for Pinterest, which is obviously a very creative organization to work for. So can you tell us a little bit about what you do for them and maybe how someone could use Pinterest and their platform to aid in their mental health or anxiety?
Yeah, I love that you sent me this question ahead of time so that I could really gather some thoughts, because there are a lot of different things you can do. Sure. I work on mental health initiatives at Pinterest. And by the way, this is the first job I've ever had where I've worked on mental health. My entire career, I have worked at so many companies in Silicon Valley, and I always worked on different video, writing, product management, different areas. And this is the first time I've been lucky enough to get to work in mental health, which is incredible, and I feel so grateful. So a few things that you can think about with Pinterest. One, and some of these ideas came to me through writing. People would share them on my Medium publication that I oversee. One is the idea of creating feeling boards. So people are creating these therapeutic boards to help them understand what they want to feel. Instead of like things they want to acquire, they'll do boards like for my soul, or just different feelings that they would like to feel, and then collect imagery that helps buoy that feeling. And then another is a gratitude board. People are creating gratitude boards just that they're constantly building so that when they feel despair, they go back to this core feeling of gratitude, which I think is really lovely. There is a whole new initiative at Pinterest, which is wellbeing.pinterest.com. And I don't know if you talked about it maybe when you were there last year, but it's basically a lot of exercises that are written exercises that help people if they're searching on things that may lead down a self-harm path or a sort of like body distortion path. Like these are things that can help people to feel better, we hope. I mean, that's the idea of why we created them. And then I also within Pinterest have started a mental health community for people who work at Pinterest. So we have a new like sort of employee resource group that that we all named. Someone was voted on Pinside Out, which is pretty cute, kind of based on that Pixar movie Inside Out. So Pinside Out is our mental health community. So there's a lot going on and a lot of new explorations all the time. And I think I know more will be coming on this front too. Pinterest is very dedicated to it, which I'm amazed by.
Well, and it's so amazing how, you know, your diagnosis has led you to this career. And
I know,
you know, that's really, really interesting because I know a lot of our students on the call in our clubs, a lot of them are interested in pursuing careers in psychology, social, being a counselor, you know, so many different avenues because it's something they're interested in but personally touched by as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I never could have anticipated this is where my path would lead. If you had told me 10 years ago, I never would have known. It just has been sort of following this lightning bolt moment, really, of realization from my diagnosis, and then just everything that came from that.
Yeah. Yeah. So getting a diagnosis is not necessarily a negative thing.
I always say it was one of the greatest things that's ever happened to me. I mean, I was actually thrilled. I had been in so much physical pain and confusion. And I was like, this is great. I'm glad to know this.
Right. Just to have a name to it. And
yeah. And sort of to understand another layer of what had been happening. It just made me look at the past and even my childhood in a completely different way. It explained so many things that I hadn't seen that pattern. It's like looking at something and all of a sudden the words come into place. That's how it felt.
I love that. Well, Meredith, let's get into some more questions from our students coming in.
Let's do it.
Sarah Dunwoody, do you want to come off mute and ask your question to Meredith?
I was asked to ask Sarah's question, so here I am filling in. But her wonderful question is, do you use any techniques to recognize when you're overthinking or feeling a lot of anxiety?
Sarah, I really love this question because one of the hardest things about anxiety I've found is simply spotting that it's happening. It is so hard when you're in the spin to witness that you're in the spin. And in fact, if you were to know, you would start feeling better. But how do you know? So recognizing when it's happening is like the core question. You really just nailed it. I would say that I've had to do a few things. One is I've been lucky enough to have a husband who has been flexible enough to start to be able to spot it with me and has worked with me. So he will be the first one to say, is something going on? What's happening? I'm seeing some stuff. And it completely helps me. Now, a loved one, a best friend could do this. I mean, part of it is talking to somebody to help, someone that you trust to help spot some of these changes or trends in you. Another thing is the physical symptoms, like I mentioned before. Like to me, overthinking is a very subjective idea, but physical symptoms are not. So if you suddenly notice your digestive system is haywire, it's a good sign something's going on with your thinking. Does that answer your question, Sarah? I hope so.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, good.
Now, what could you say to a friend or a loved one that you know tends to overthink?
I mean, at this point, now that I'm like a spokesperson for overthinking, I don't have the same thing that other people would. But I can say one of the pieces of advice that it's a phrase that I use a lot, is that you have to be gawky to get graceful. And in the beginning, when you're dealing with mental health, when you're talking about mental health, it can feel gawky. You can feel awkward. I'll never forget this time I was at, I have a 10-year-old daughter, but this was years ago. So I was at a parents circle with my husband at this circle, and we were going around, it's supposed to be about mindfulness, and everyone was telling a little bit about themselves. And when it got to me, I said, hey everyone, they did not know me whatsoever. Hey everyone, I have generalized anxiety disorder, so I've been working on mental health and mindfulness. And there was just sort of this super awkward silence in the group. And my husband looked at me like, what? Is this like your new reality? Is this what you're going to be doing from now on? And the answer was yes. However, I have learned how to do it in a much more natural way. And usually when I'm talking to someone who I sense may have something going on, there are two tacks I take. One is I simply talk about myself, and often I find that makes somebody else open up. So lead with your own vulnerability. It's amazing how it works. Someone will suddenly open up and say like, oh, I actually have that. And a second one is, and this is super simple, but to sort of ask a little bit about their sleeping. And the thing that I've noticed when I talk to people about how they're sleeping or how they're falling asleep is they'll say things like, before I go to bed, I have a cocktail, I'll smoke a joint, and I'll take like 4 ibuprofen. And if I hear something like that, and many people just take this for granted, like this is what it takes to go to sleep. And I'll just simply say like, do you think you need that much to sleep? Like, do you think that you're in that much pain? Like, what's going on? Are you in physical pain? And so usually like going down the path of the physical pain conversation can really help that as well. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, Mia, do you want to come off mute? It looks like you had a couple of questions.
Yeah, which one should I ask?
Whichever one you want. Ask both.
Whichever one you want.
Okay. So once you recognize that you're going through the anxiety in that moment, or you're overthinking, like you were saying before, what are the best tips you have to like try to stop that or relieve those feelings?
I have so many tips, and the book is like basically all tips.
Okay.
Like that's basically what the book is. So it's like very like broken down tip by tip. But I mentioned the wave. I mentioned understanding that the wave is a hormone rush that hits your body. After the wave hits your body, sometimes you feel shaky. I don't know if you've ever felt this or if anyone on the call has felt this, but like it's almost like some people when they have a panic attack, they can feel shaky afterwards. And in the past, I always thought of that shakiness as something to avoid or caused fear in me. But my mindset about the shakiness has completely changed. So now when I start to feel ramped up and then I start to feel shaky, I am very grateful because it's a sign that the wave has passed again. Part of it is understanding like, hey, the wave comes, the wave goes. The wave comes, the wave goes. And when it goes, you get shaky, and that's a sign that you're strong, that you've like made it through again. So I would say a way to, I don't even think of it as stop yourself. I actually think of it as kind of living in harmony if you can, or just living alongside this thing that's part of your life, is to recognize it comes and it goes, and you are strong through that. And the shakiness is a sign you made it. But there are thousands of other ones. I mean, there are things like certain sentences I don't allow myself to say. The words if only put together, I always say are like hemlock, like they will kill me if I say that. If only I got this job, if only I got this boyfriend, like nope, that like not even allowed to go down that path. So I have a lot of different like mental guardrails like that in the book that are just like, I can't do this because I know where it will lead. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Good.
Thanks, Mia. Brenna, you said we had another question come in from a student?
Yes. So this other question is really along the lines of what you were just talking about, but kind of just a few steps before that like wave that you were speaking of. But what are So now I'm losing it here. Apologies. So what do you suggest for an individual who can't focus during a panic attack? So kind of in the midst of it, when you can't really focus because you can't physically maybe see or stay still or
of course. Yeah, I mean, I don't think focusing is the top of the list when you have a panic attack. And I know that that could happen during a test or during something that you're facing or even a public speaking moment. So you may feel like you need to take control, but our body is going to do what it does no matter what our brain says we want it to do. Sometimes we don't have that kind of control. And accepting that we don't have control, it's like a Chinese finger. I don't know if you know what those are. They're like this, it's like you put your fingers in, you're trying to pull it out and you can't get it out. It's like that. Like the more you try to control it, the harder it gets. So actually just being like, I can't control it, that's like, oh, magically, you're suddenly free. Now, I'm not saying that just stops a panic attack, but it does allow you to let yourself off the hook in a way that can like really help it and diminish it.
Awesome. Thanks for speaking on their behalf, Brenna. Manny, you had a question, if you'd like to come off mute, about just how to tell someone about your own anxiety.
Yeah, like how do you like confront someone, whether it be family, friends, you know, like a loved one, like how do you tell them like, hey, like this is what I'm going through, like I need help, like how can you help me?
One thing that's super hard about family is that your experience may feel like a reflection on them. And that has been very difficult for me and other people in the world that I've seen, is that you're not allowed to be okay because that suggests they're not okay or they did something. And so I think the more you can focus it on yourself and use a lot of I statements and not imply anything about them, if possible, that's the most you can do. So the most you can do is try to tell your story and gain that, you know, instead of feeling so gawky with it, gain the strength as you tell the story. You know, I was listening to a podcast the other day and the person said, when I first told my story, I was so uncomfortable and everyone could tell. But now I've told that story 50 times and it almost loses its power. It's no longer scary. It's no longer causing that feeling in me. It's almost like I'm bored of it at this point. And so part of I think my number one piece of advice to you would be to start telling your story, be it in writing, be it to a friend, be it to loved ones, until you feel comfortable telling it to that most difficult person, like a parent.
Thank you, that really helped.
Oh, good.
That's great. Okay, is it Anya? Would you like to ask your question? I hope I said your name right.
Yeah, Ananya. My question was, when do you think someone should consider therapy or professional help? Because you talked a lot about what you learned after you've gotten diagnosed. And so I was wondering, like, if you don't know that you have something, but you're experiencing some sort of problem, at what point should you consider getting professional help?
You know, it's such a good question. I went to 5 therapists over the course of my life before my diagnosis, and no one spotted that I had anxiety. My husband even said, can you please ask them about anxiety if that could be an issue? And I remember very clearly that the therapist said, you don't have any more anxiety than anyone else does. And the reason that mechanism happened that way is that I looked successful. I looked like everything was fine. Yes, I would say I had migraines, but migraines could be happening to a lot of people. So it's very hard if you don't have the self-knowledge to be able to share that with the therapist. So I think in terms of like, when should someone consider? I tend to go with objective reality, and objective reality is physical pain. So if you have physical pains that you cannot figure out, or you find yourself like trying all these different sort of homeopathic and massage therapists, all these other things that you're trying to do, something to bear in mind is that your mental health could be affecting that. If you're not having physical pain, if you're just having a hard time and you find yourself like ruminating, then I would say that's still, the fact that you're asking the question, the fact that somebody is asking that question of themselves is a sign that something is happening. Like, it's probably a sign that they're confused, they're unsure what their thinking is doing to them. In which case, finding some help and support as you figure it out and experimenting is already just inherent within the question, a good thing to do.
Okay, thank you.
Good.
Thanks. Joyce, would you like to ask your question to Meredith?
It's a good question,
sorry.
Joyce.
Yeah,
I can
just
totally.
basically, yeah, I have just like, you know, friends and other people who you can tell that they're struggling but really don't want help. So how do you help? Like, how do you help them when that happens?
All you can do is be a model for others. You cannot, as much as I tried in the past and it was just never a good idea, you cannot try to change someone through a great argument or like a great persuasive argument about their mental health. Like, really the only way you can remotely convince someone is like kind of the magical way is to be a role model of a different way to behave. And it's very powerful, but the hard thing is it's silent and you can't always know it's happening. And sometimes it's like years later that they're like, I remember you told me this thing about yourself and it really affected me. But at the time, like, for example, me working on this stuff for so many years, there are times I don't hear anything from anyone for a long time. And I may not have any idea I'm having an effect. It's almost like you just have to believe. You just have to, that's the magic of it. You just have to believe that if you keep being a role model and talking about yourself, the more you focus on yourself and your own experience, that gets into people a lot more than you trying to talk to them, because defenses are up immediately. It's automatically like, does that make sense? Have you seen that?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good luck.
Great question. Joshua, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. I know I kind of feel like the last question is probably a similar answer to a similar question, I guess. But do you have any advice when it comes to talking or listening to someone who is vocalizing feelings of worthlessness or inability to kind of do anything right?
You know what, though? This is a little different because at this point, someone is aware enough to be sharing what's happening with them, which is a different level than someone who's like pretending that nothing's wrong or sort of presenting as though nothing's wrong. So I think that if you're hearing someone who is going through that, it's good to have a set of resources, a set of ideas, whether it be just next steps. Like, maybe you would be interested in reading this blog or writing about this or taking action in this way. Because action actually is the hardest thing to do when you're feeling worthless. It's so hard to know how to break down the insurmountable to the point that you can like actually take a small action. So your job as a listener is to help that person break down these walls into smaller, doable, bite-sized pieces. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Awesome. Dylan, do you want to go next?
Absolutely. So I guess this is also a little bit similar to the previous answer, but just my question is, what's your advice for staying productive with intense stressors in your life? One big problem I have is I'll either not work on what I'm supposed to be doing, or I'll start by creating a to-do list. But oftentimes I've noticed that like sometimes if I don't like perfectly live up to crossing every single thing off, then sometimes my stress will get worse.
I love that you said perfectly, because this definitely is a form of perfectionism. And I think it's really interesting that procrastination is an emotional response. We don't think of it that way. We think of it as just sort of a bad habit, but it's actually completely an emotional response. And when it comes to feeling overwhelmed, um, it is connected to the last one, in that breaking things down into a doable level is the work that needs to happen. For example, if you tell yourself, I need to run 10 miles a day, it's like completely not doable. So how do you break it down? What if you break it down into, I need to literally just put on my running shoes? Like, what if you break it down to the point where you are able to achieve it? And then you slowly build on that. I need to put on my running shoes and walk outside the house. That's all I need to do. And it's almost like you're teaching yourself the resilience of accomplishing it and feeling good. But the goal really is to change. You have to change your goal. You cannot stick with this perfectionist goal. You have to change your goal and ratchet it down. There was somebody on the Beautiful Voyager Slack room last week who said, I really want to write a New York Times best-selling book because my uncle is a best-selling author in the New York Times and I feel like I should be. And I was like, well, how much have you written lately? And he's like, I haven't really written. And the more I dug into it, it's because he thinks he needs to write a New York Times book, which is not even in his control, by the way. But I was like, well, let's start with a newsletter. Like, what do you think about writing a 300-word newsletter? And you send it just to your 10 best friends. Like, how do you ratchet down everything that you're saying to yourself you need to do to the point where you've accomplished something and you feel like you're on the path?
Thank you.
Do you think you can do it, Dylan? Do you think you can do it? I hope so.
I think he froze.
He's frozen now.
Yeah. Yep,
Oh, I love this new question.
Yeah.
What do you suggest for the people who feel like therapy is too condescending? You know what? You're kind of speaking my language a little bit, and I'm going to tell you why. I think it is incredibly hard to find the right fit of therapist. Condescending could be one way that you feel that that's true. For me, it was always, I don't think you really understand me. Like, it turns out in part because I was trying to entertain my therapist and I never realized it, but like, I never thought they were actually seeing something new and giving me new information. So what do I suggest for people who feel like therapy is too condescending? I think that therapy is not for everyone. I certainly believe in therapy for some people. I think for some of us with anxiety disorders, talk therapy can get me stuck in my head. One time I asked the therapist, how long do you think I'll need to be in therapy? And she said, until you don't have things to talk about. And my husband was like, you will be in therapy you will always have something to talk about. You will be in therapy like beyond life. And so I think it's really hard to understand what kind of therapy do I need. Now, part of it is where is your head? If you're on this anxious spectrum, cognitive behavioral therapy is very different than more traditional talk therapy. It's more action-based. It's more about breaking things down. It's more about thinking in a different way. So I guess instead of thinking, I'm not going to like this therapist for X reason, which I totally get, but instead of thinking that way, you might want to think, what is it that I could use an outside perspective on? And what kind of person can give me the right outside perspective? I hope that helps.
Awesome. We had another question come through privately that I'll ask directly to you, Meredith. How has it been talking about mental health and anxiety in Silicon Valley?
Yeah, it's a great question. It was not trendy at first, I can tell you that much. 2015, when I started, there was a little stink factor around the topic. Like I said, sharing it in that group, and there was a little, I talked to people who are sort of in the successful realm or venture capitalists, and there was just, I don't know, there was a little kind of, almost like it was my pet project, but it didn't have legs or interest for the outside world, but it's changed a ton. Now, of course, everyone wants to jump onto the bandwagon of like, how do we solve this? How do we solve mental health? Or how do we create an app that will solve everything? And I appreciate that the stigma is changing so much. It's changing so dramatically, even in 2 months. It's amazing. I can't even believe it.
Well, just what you're doing with your colleagues there at Pinterest
Yeah.
and talking about your own mental health, most definitely 5 years ago, many organizations across the country wouldn't dare.
No, I would never have this job. I started talking about my mental health in the workplace back then, and it was awkward, but I didn't mind. I was like, you know, I've been lucky enough to keep getting jobs, and I sort of waded through that period, and it's changed, but and I'm glad it has. And
Yeah.
I think younger people are so much better on these topics. Like, part of it is like more younger people have to enter the workplace, because as they do, like, it kind of goes away a little bit, or it's starting to go away. Certainly, like, my colleagues in their 20s, just, they don't even think twice about this.
Yeah, there's so much more open. I know just with everyone here in our Bring Change to Mind clubs, there's so much more opening to sharing about their feelings and connecting with others. You know, with speaking of Pinterest and just trying to give them some tools that they can take back to their clubs. I know you talked about like gratitude boards and other things like that along the lines of mental health. What are maybe some key search terms, if that's applicable, that they could search for to help with their clubs? Because to give you an idea, they do a lot of activities in the school system. So it could be like a self-care activity, or it could be around building confidence, or, you know, talking about various areas of mental health. What kind of things could they search for that they could maybe take to their clubs? I mean, I see a lot of Bring Change to Mind club boards in our near future.
I would like to see a no normal club board, by the way. I am like interested in seeing more about that. And let me tell you, when you read my little bio about the in a normal way, I was suddenly like, uh-oh, hashtag no normal. I was feeling it. So what are some terms? I think it starts with you all know your clubs the best. You know what people are, where their heads are. So I think part of it is, what do they most need help with? Is it confidence? Is it sort of being understood? And as a result, search terms could change. It could be things like, for example, I just the other day worked on some boards around mental health that were representations of more interesting mental health in entertainment, in writing, and putting together visuals of episodes of shows, of comedians, of all these things that like make sort of just delve in a way that I felt super inspired by. So I think part of it is thinking around, what vision are you? I mean, for me, creating nature boards is like deeply soothing, like crazy moss growing in, you know, framing the picture is like, I love it. But I also am super interested in visualization boards. Like, visualization is a super powerful tool if you can try to hearken imagery that makes you feel that way. And Instagram is amazing with it. There are lots of great like Instagram profiles that are visualizations and ideas around that. But I think sort of thinking about how to bring a visual element to what you're creating.
Yeah. Well, and gang, this is something to think about in the new school year, maybe creating your own BC2M club board where you can share it with your other school members to kind of inspire them as well. So, well, Meredith, I have one last question for you that I think these students would really appreciate hearing. So what would you tell, or what advice would you give to your younger self when you were in high school? That's a loaded question.
It's a great question.
Yeah, it's a wonderful question.
Meredith, you might be drinking too much because you have anxiety. Your migraines might be a sign of anxiety. I also would want to tell myself that writing copious journals, as much as I thought that was like an expression of my true self, may not have been great for my mental health. I never would have known that. I mean, I just wrote these massive journals one after the next. And learning how to write and think in a different way has helped me a lot. So I guess I would just try to coach myself through that a little bit. I wouldn't have understood it at all. I mean, my mind would have been blown, but.
You're like, whatever, Meredith.
Yeah, who are you?
Well, Meredith, thank you so very much for this conversation. I think it was so timely and so important, and I really appreciate you taking the time. We're going to finish up here. Brenna, would you mind coming off mute? We want to take a couple of screenshots because, you know, if you didn't take a picture, it didn't happen. And then we'll announce our gift card winners. And Meredith has been so kind that she will be also giving away 4 copies of her book. So we will announce those winners as well.
Yay!
Brenna, I will hand it over to you.
Awesome. So we'll take pictures first. So y'all don't know what screen you're on, so just smile and put your hands up every time I say cheese. Okay. 1, 2, 3, cheese. Okay, next page. 1, 2, 3, cheese. Yay! Awesome. Okay. For our gift card winners, they are Raphael from NorCal. There you are. I'm so sorry if I'm saying this wrong, and I know you already pronounced it once, but Anaya from Arizona.
Yay!
Joyce from SoCal. And Erica from Indiana. Awesome. And for our book winners, we have Dylan from New Jersey, Mia from SoCal, I believe, Manny also from SoCal, and Ria, that's it, who it is. Congrats, everybody.
Yay! Thank you all so much for your great questions. I'm so appreciative of your time and that you wanted to connect.
Yeah, we're always blown away. I mean, the questions are always so insightful.
So
and
good.
They're so much more open than what, you know, we were back in high school.
I know, I'm really impressed.
Yeah. So Meredith, can you share where everyone can find you on social media, all the places?
The website Beautiful Voyager is Bevoya, Bevoya. And that is also my handle on Instagram and on Twitter. So Bevoya. And by the way, if you just go to Beautiful Voyager, it links to all those different places.
Okay.
And then there's Invisible Illness, which is the largest mental health publication on Medium. And if you're interested in writing for it, we're open to that. So you Google Medium Invisible Illness and you'll see that.
Super. Well, and when you all get your books in the mail too, you'll have to take a picture and with the little
Put
mini
it on Instagram
and tag Meredith.
Yes, tag me on Instagram and I will happily share it.
Yeah, especially with the little ones. So again,
oh my God, the little baby.
Oh, thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you so much, Meredith. Again, make sure to follow along on social media and check your inboxes. We're going to take a couple weeks off from our national calls, but we'll have another one next month that you guys will not want to miss. Wink, wink. So an evaluation will be sent out right after today's call if you wouldn't mind filling that out. And so much gratitude to you all again. Thank you so much for your questions. And Meredith, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks, Meredith.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.